Hi, and welcome to Wealth Stories for Sleep.
Here, the idea is simple. While you sleep, you grow richer. We gently send messages of abundance straight into your subconscious through calm stories made to gently guide you to sleep.
Here, the stories are not just tales, they are keys. Keys that open doors in your subconscious, planting seeds of calm, hope, and prosperity. Listen with an open heart. Let the words flow like a smooth river. And, if you want, come back tomorrow, because repetition, it transforms. She reconstructs. She makes the world inside you grow. Marina's journey of transformation. Marina woke up once again at 5 in the morning, not because of the alarm, but because of the familiar sound of bills piling up in her mind. At 32 years old, a single mother to Sophia, 8, and Gabriel, 5, she carried the weight of being solely responsible for her family's livelihood. Her salary as an administrative assistant barely covered rent, and with each passing month, the feeling of drowning grew stronger. Sitting in the small kitchen of a rented apartment, Marina stared at the bills scattered across the table. There's no way out, she thought, repeating the same phrase that had echoed in her mind for months. It was as if an inner voice constantly whispered, "A woman alone with kids can't succeed. You were born to struggle, not to win." But that Tuesday morning, something different happened. Sophia approached her, still in her pajamas, and asked, "Mommy, why do you always look sad when you look at those papers?" The innocence of the question cut through the layers of resignation Marina had built around herself. "I wasn't born to live like this," Marina murmured, surprised by her own words. It was the first time in years she questioned her situation differently. "I deserve abundance and prosperity in my life," she said again, this time with more conviction, as if awakening from a long sleep. In the days that followed, Marina began observing her inner dialogue. She realized that her words were seeds. She planted daily in her mind, "I don't have money. I can't. It's impossible." She decided it was time to plant different seeds. "I am capable of creating wealth," she began repeating every morning. "Opportunities constantly come to me." The transformation didn't happen overnight, but Marina started noticing small changes. A coworker mentioned a free online digital marketing course. Before, she would have thought, "I don't have time for that." Now, a new inner voice said, "I make time for what helps me grow." Marina enrolled in the course and discovered a world she had never known. She learned about social media, online sales, content creation. More importantly, she discovered talents she had never valued. "I have valuable skills the world needs," she repeated while practicing the course exercises. With each new lesson, Marina felt her mindset expanding. "Abundance is my natural right," she affirmed as she created her first social media page. She decided to start offering organization and planning services, something she had always done naturally, but never considered as a source of income. Her first client came through a neighbor's referral. Marina charged a low fee, still carrying the belief that "I can't ask for too much." But the result was so good that the client recommended her to 3 friends. "My work brings real value to people's lives," Marina began affirming proudly. Little by little, Marina raised her prices. Whenever the old voice whispered, "You're charging too much," she consciously replied, "I deserve to be well paid for my work. My worth is not limited by external circumstances. Months passed, and Marina developed a complete system for home organization and family financial planning. She created her own method, which she called home harmony, combining physical organization with financial structure. "I am an innovative entrepreneur," she would say to herself. Savoring each word, Gabriel and Sophia began to notice changes at home, not just financial ones, but in their mother's energy. "Mommy, you're happier now," Sophia observed. During dinner, Marina smiled, realizing that her inner transformation was reflecting throughout the family. "I created this reality through my thoughts and actions," Marina reflected as she calculated her monthly income. In 6 months, she had tripled her earnings. More importantly, she had completely changed her relationship with money and with her possibilities. Marina started documenting her journey on social media, sharing not just organization tips, but also her personal transformation. "I inspire others to change their lives" became one of her favorite affirmations. Her growth accelerated. Marina received invitations to give talks, created an online course about her method, and developed a consulting service for women who wanted to reorganize their financial lives. "I have valuable knowledge to share," she would repeat before each presentation. 1 year after the beginning of her journey, Marina moved into a bigger house, not just because she could afford it, but because she finally believed she deserved it. "I deserve to live with abundance and comfort," she declared while choosing the decor for her new home. Sophia and Gabriel had their own rooms, a garden to play in, and more importantly, a mother who radiated confidence and possibility. "Mommy, you're amazing," Gabriel said, hugging her legs. Marina realized she had become the example she wanted to be for her children. "I am proof that it's possible to completely transform your life," Marina wrote in her journal that night. Her company now had 5 employees, all women she mentored. Not just professionally, but personally, Marina created a free mentorship program for single mothers, giving back to the community what she had received from the universe. "The more I give, the more I receive," she discovered was a natural law that worked perfectly in her life. 2 years after that transformative Tuesday morning, Marina was speaking at a women's entrepreneurship event. She looked out at an audience of 500 women and said, "You were not born to survive, we're born to thrive. Each one of you has everything inside you to create the life you desire." After the talk, a young mother approached her with tears in her eyes. "I was ready to give up. Your words made me believe it's possible." Marina smiled, remembering herself 2 years earlier. Not only is it possible, inevitable when you choose to change from the inside out, Marina understood that her true wealth wasn't just in her bank account, but in her ability to reinvent herself, believe in herself, and inspire other women to do the same. "I am abundance in action," she repeated every morning, knowing each word was a seed planted not only in her own mind, but in the minds of everyone who heard her today. Marina is the CEO of a consulting firm that earned over 1 million reais last year. But when asked about her greatest success, she points to Sophia and Gabriel, who grew up seeing that limits exist only in our minds, then that a determined woman can create any reality she chooses. "I transformed my life, and my life transformed others," Marina reflects as she plans her next project, a foundation to empower single mothers across the country. "My story of prosperity is just the beginning of a wave of transformation that will touch thousands." of lives. The journey that began with an innocent question from a child became a personal revolution that proves it doesn't matter where you come from or what your current circumstances are. What matters is the decision to plant new seeds in your mind and water them with consistent action. Marina learned that prosperity isn't a destination, but a state of mind that manifests in tangible results when nurtured with faith, persistence, and an unshakable belief in our infinite possibilities. I deserve all the abundance the universe has to offer, and I receive it with gratitude and joy. The letter that arrived too early. She never expected anything to arrive that day. It was the kind of day where the minutes blurred into each other, like soft clouds that forget where they begin. She had been folding laundry in silence, her thoughts tangled in the weight of everything unfinished. When the knock came, it didn't sound urgent. It was gentle, like someone remembering an old song. She opened the door to find no one there. Only a single envelope on the doorstep. No return address, just her name, written in careful cursive, as if by someone who knew her well but hadn't spoken in years. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. It was too light to be important, too old-looking to be recent. She closed the door and sat down slowly. The house creaked around her like it too was holding its breath. She opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, neatly folded and perfectly preserved. The ink wasn't smudged, but faded slightly at the edges, like time had touched it kindly. The first line read, "This letter is from your future, but not the future you think." She blinked, not because she didn't understand, but because something in her chest stirred. A memory, maybe, a voice she hadn't heard in years. The letter continued, "I'm writing this before it's too late, because one day you'll forget who you were, and I don't want that to happen." The words felt like a mirror. Not the kind that shows your face, but the kind that shows the parts you've buried under layers of responsibility, fear, and noise. The letter listed things she hadn't thought about in years. You used to love red flowers. You once wanted to live by the sea. You believed in magic, remember? She paused, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. Then came the line that undid her. "It's not too late. You can still remember. You can still choose." She stood up and walked down the hallway. For a moment, the mirror on the wall didn't reflect her face. It reflected her younger self, eyes wide, dreaming, unapologetically alive. She stepped. Outside, the garden in the backyard hadn't been touched in years. She knelt on the earth and planted one seed. Just one. Not out of duty, but out of memory. That night, she folded the letter gently. This time, man placed it inside a wooden box. She didn't know who sent it. Maybe no one. Maybe it had always been there, waiting for her to be ready. The next morning, she smiled. For the first time in weeks. Not because everything had changed, but because she had. She was always the quiet one, while the other children ran barefoot through the fields, chasing kites or laughter. She sat beside her grandmother's porch with an old shoebox and a pair of dull scissors. Inside that box, she saw something no one else could. Not cardboard, not glue, not scraps. A house. Every Saturday, she would dig through the recycling pile, collecting bits of string, pieces of fabric, buttons, bottle caps, and anything that felt like it belonged in a home. One time, her uncle asked, "Why do you spend so much time on trash?" She looked up and replied, "Because it's not trash once it becomes something I can live in." He laughed, but she didn't. She smoothed out a scrap of newspaper it was velvet and folded it gently into what would become a tiny armchair. Her grandmother, who watched her without interrupting, began saving her old sewing ribbons and tea box lids, leaving them near the girl's corner like silent offerings. The girl never explained what each house meant, but each one had a bedroom, a kitchen, a garden, and a window, always a window. "Why the window?" her grandmother once asked. "Because I need to see where I'm going," the girl said, without lifting her eyes. At night, she would line the boxes on the floor beside her mattress. Some were painted, some bare, but each one carried a piece of her longing. Not the kind of longing that aches, but the kind that knows it's only waiting. She didn't know the word manifestation. She only knew how to make space. She believed that if she built enough homes in small scale, one would eventually appear in full. "I'm just practicing," she whispered once to a moth that landed on the edge of her box. "I'll be ready when the real one comes." Her mother, tired from long shifts and too many bills, once stepped on one of the boxes by accident. It collapsed beneath her heel. The girl said nothing, but that night she made a new one, and this time she added a sign above the door. "Welcome back." There was no bitterness in her, only continuity, quiet persistence that didn't ask for applause. Her classmates teased her once, calling her the girl with cardboard dreams. She smiled, better than having none. One day, while helping her grandmother sweep the front yard, a man passed by carrying blueprints. He dropped one. The girl picked it up and stared. It was almost identical to her latest shoebox house. Same porch, same slanted roof, same garden path. The man turned around, surprised. "You like houses?" he asked. She simply nodded. He looked at her for a moment and said, "You've got the eyes of someone who's already lived in 1,000 of them." She didn't understand then. But that night, she made her biggest house yet, and instead of a roof, she left it open. Because now, she believed the sky had started watching. The next morning, something strange happened. Her grandmother, who rarely left the house, called her outside. "Look," she said, pointing to a small wooden crate near the fence. Inside it were scraps of fine fabric, tiny decorative beads, and a roll of golden thread. No note, no explanation, just beauty, as if the universe had dropped off a gift tailored to her dreams. The girl smiled and whispered, "Thank you," not to anyone visible, but to the wind itself. That day, she used the golden thread to stitch curtains into her shoebox windows. For the first time, the rooms didn't just look like homes. They felt like them, soft, ready, alive. A few days later, a classmate who had once teased her approached with a shy look. "Can you make one for me?" he asked. "A house." She looked surprised. "Why?" He shrugged. "I just want something that feels like mine." She nodded. "But you have to choose the rooms. I only build what people believe in." He thought for a moment and said, "I want a tree in the middle of the living room." She didn't ask why. She simply began building. Word spread. Soon, other children were quietly handing her bottle caps and velvet scraps, saying things like, "This is for the music room," or "My house needs a secret door." She never said no. She only smiled and built. Every house was different. Every one of them had a window, and slowly the laughter changed. No more mocking. Now they came to her with awe. Not because her boxers were perfect, but because they felt like something deeper, like prayers with walls. One afternoon, while placing her newest house on the edge of the porch, a woman from the village walked by. She stopped. "Did you make this?" The girl nodded. "It's beautiful," the woman said, crouching to examine it. "I design real houses, but I've never seen one made with so much feeling." The girl blinked. "They're not real yet, but they will be." The woman laughed softly, not unkindly. "You sound like someone I used to be." She handed the girl a small notebook with blank graph pages. "Draw your next one here," she said. "Maybe one day we'll build it." That night, the girl didn't use cardboard. She picked up the notebook and drew a house with a lavender roof, a round window, a wooden porch, and flower beds shaped like moons. She titled it, "The One I'll Live In." Then she folded the page and placed it inside her pillowcase. "Sleep next to it," her grandmother whispered, "so your dreams can get used to the idea." The days grew longer, and with them, her houses grew more detailed. She no longer needed tape or glowingly vision and faith. Each box became less a toy and more a message, whispered softly into time. She added tiny letters inside some of them, notes to herself that read, "I will live in joy," or "My roof will not leak," or simply, "It's coming." No one else knew what she was doing, but the universe did. One afternoon, her teacher called her aside. "There's a contest," she said. "It's for young designers. You don't have to win, but I think you should enter." The girl hesitated. "I don't use rulers or fancy paper." The teacher smiled. "You use belief. That's rarer." With her grandmother's help, she selected 5 of her favorite shoebox houses and placed them carefully inside a basket lined with fabric. She didn't try to make them look perfect. She wanted them to look true. The day of the exhibition, the other children arrived with sleek models, printed blueprints, and polished presentations. She placed her basket on the corner table. Some laughed, but others leaned closer. Adults tilted their heads, eyes softening. "There's something about these," one woman said. "They feel lived in." A man from the city's architecture board stared at the little house with the open roof. "It's simple," he whispered, "but it makes me feel like I've been there before." She didn't win first place, but she won something else. A quiet invitation. A letter arrived the next week, offering her a mentorship program at a nearby design studio. "We don't usually take students this young," it read, "but we believe in seeds." Her grandmother cried, holding the letter to her chest like it was a key. That night, the girl didn't make a house. She stood by the window instead, looking out at the stars. She whispered, "I knew you were listening." Then she smiled and placed her favorite house, the one with the lavender roof, on the windowsill. "You go first," she told it. "I'll follow soon." And just before sleep took her, she swore she saw a flicker of light move through the box, not from a lamp, from within. The design studio was quiet and full of light. It didn't smell like paper or glue, but of possibility. On her first day, she was given a small desk and a stack of blank sketch paper. "Draw anything," her mentor said. "We'll worry about the rules later." Her hands hesitated at first, but then they moved like they remembered. She drew curved staircases, round windows, crooked chimneys with stars above them. Homes that breathed. Homes that listened. The others in the room looked over, curious. "You draw like you've already lived there," one boy whispered. She smiled. "Maybe I have." During a break, she wandered through the back garden and saw a fig tree, just like the one she used to imagine outside her shoebox houses. Its branches curved in the same way. Its roots were just as wide. She touched the bark and whispered, "You came." That evening, her grandmother gave her a small, wrapped package. "For your new room," she said. Inside was a curtain made from the same golden thread the girl had once used on her boxers. "I saved the rest," the grandmother smiled. The girl hung it on the window, which overlooked a garden with moon-shaped flower beds. She stood there for a long time. It was exactly like the one she had drawn. Exactly the lavender roof, the round window. Even the porch railing had the same spiral pattern. For a moment, she thought maybe she was dreaming. But then she heard the soft creak of the floor, the hum of wind through the curtain, and the rhythm of her own breath. No, this was real. And yet, it wasn't new. It felt like home because it had always existed inside her. She unpacked her belongings carefully. At the bottom of her bag was the notebook. She opened it to the page with the house sketch. Holding it against the window, she smiled. A perfect match. Later that night, she took out her last shoebox house and placed it on her shelf. "You're not needed anymore," she whispered, "but I'll keep you as proof." Then she lit a candle not to see better, but to say thank you, because some dreams don't knock. They enter softly when you've already opened the door. Years passed. The girl became a woman. And though her hands had grown steadier, she never stopped building with wonder. Her home, the one with the lavender roof and the round window, stood at the edge of a quiet field now. Children often passed by, pausing to stare. It didn't look fancy. It looked warm, inviting, like something out of a story they hadn't heard yet. One morning, a small voice called from the gate. "Can I see the house with the moonflowers?" She opened the door. A girl stood there holding a shoebox, taped, colored, careful. "I made one like yours," the child said. The woman bent down and took it in her hands. Inside were 4 rooms, one for music, one for laughter, one for quiet, and one labeled "Someday." She nodded. "This is a good house." The child's eyes widened. "Will it work?" "It already is," the woman replied. That evening, she cleared a small corner of her garden and set out tiny chairs. She began inviting children from the village to bring their boxes. Some came with castles, some with tents. One boy brought only a key and said, "I'm still imagining the door." She told them every dream is a doorway we build not to escape, but to prepare. And they listened, quietly, faithfully, like she once had. In her attic, she kept the old shoeboxes faded now, but still full of life. Sometimes, when the wind was just right, she could swear they whispered back, not words, but warmth. Proof that even cardboard can become a cathedral when love is folded into its corners. On her birthday, her grandmother, older, slower, but still full of spard, gave her a new gift. A single ribbon, gold, untouched. "For the next house," she said, "whatever shape it takes." That night, the woman sat by her window, watching stars pour over the hills. She thought about how it all began, with money, or plans, or instructions, but with one small box, one small belief, and a girl who didn't know the word manifestation, but practiced it anyway. She smiled, lit a candle, and whispered to the wind, "I am home." They said he was strange, not because he wore mismatched shoes or walked with a slight limp, but because of what he carried through the village. A wooden cart, painted yellow, filled with nothing. At least, that's what people thought. The sign. On the front read, "Sunlight, for sale, cloudy days only." Most laughed. Who would buy sun on a cloudy day? They asked. That's exactly when there isn't any. But he never argued. He simply smiled, adjusted the cart's crooked wheel, and waited. Always on cloudy days, never when the skies were clear. The villagers called him the light seller. Children whispered that he must be mad. Some said he was pretending. Others said he was poor and desperate. But none could explain why he kept showing up, week after week, cloud after cloud. He parked the car in the same spot beside the bakery, placed a single golden cloth over the empty tray, and waited. Sometimes hours, sometimes all day. No one ever saw him sell anything, but he kept coming back. He wasn't old, but his face held the softness of someone who had seen grief without letting it harden him. His hands were calloused, but his eyes were gentle. One day, a boy approached him and asked, "What do you sell, really?" The man looked down and said, "Sunlight." "But there is none today," the boy insisted. The man nodded. "That's when people need it the most." He pulled something from his pocket, a small glass jar, inside which glowed a soft, warm light. The boy's eyes widened. "Is that real?" "Real enough," the man said, handing it to him. "Hold it when you forget how light feels." The boy clutched the jar and ran home. That evening, he placed it beside his bed. And though it gave no heat, he swore it made his dreams brighter. News spread, slowly, quietly. The next time the skies turned gray, a woman stopped by the cart. She looked tired, worn by days that felt too long, and nights that gave no rest. "Do you have anything for someone who's forgotten how to feel warm?" she asked. He nodded and reached into a small wooden drawer. From it, he pulled a folded note, sealed with golden wax. "Don't open it now," he said. "Only when the silence gets too heavy." She took it, not knowing why, and walked away with tears in her eyes. Inside that note were just 3 words: "You are light." The village didn't change overnight. The sun still disappeared behind clouds. But on those days, more people stopped at the cart, not because they believed, but because they wanted to. And that, the man believed, was enough. The cart began to gather dust less quickly. Not because the skies cleared, no. The clouds remained loyal, but because people started stopping, even if only for a moment. Some came for jars that shimmered faintly. Others, 4-folded notes sealed with gold. And some just stood in silence beside him, not saying anything at all. He never forced a sale, never explained. He simply offered. And somehow, that was enough. The village baker, once skeptical, began placing small pieces of sun-shaped bread near the cart on rainy mornings. For the cause, she'd wink. The man would thank her with a nod. One morning, the school teacher passed by, her coat damped from the mist. My students speak about you more than they speak about numbers, she said. He smiled. Maybe. Because they remember what light feels like better than adults do. She paused, then added, Can you come speak to them? The man tilted his head. I don't teach. You do, she replied. You just don't call it that. That week, he sat with the children under the crooked awning beside the school. He told them about how clouds aren't enemies of the sun, only its soft blanket. How some lights can't be seen until you close your eyes. One child asked, How do you catch sunlight in jars? He answered, You don't. You remember it. That's what goes inside. And they believed him, because children don't need proof when their hearts recognize truth. That night, dozens of glass jars lined the windows of the village homes, some filled with golden paper, others with dried marigolds, some with nothing at all. But every jar glowed, maybe from within, maybe from belief. It didn't matter. Even skeptics softened. The blacksmith, gruff and loud, left a small coin wrapped in a yellow cloth on the cart one morning. No words, no eye contact, just a gesture, and the man understood. He added a new sign to the cart that day. Pay what it's worth to you. Some paid in buttons, others in secrets. A few in nothing but thanks. One evening, after the clouds had spilled a long, soft rain, the man sat by the riverbank behind the village, alone, cart beside him. The sky was the color of pewter, and the water reflected 1,000 quiet sorrows. He whispered, Are you still with me? And from the cart, a faint glow rose, as if the jars were breathing. He didn't smile. He just closed his eyes and placed a hand over his heart. Even he needed reminding sometimes. That night, he dreamed not of sun, but of people walking through fog, holding jars, lighting their own paths, one by one, slowly, together, not saved, but seen. Long before the cart, before the jars, before the sign. He was just a boy who lived in a house where the curtains were always drawn. His mother believed that darkness kept sadness out, but he always thought it just kept joy from finding the way in. He would sneak out when she wasn't watching, run into the garden, face the sky, and memorize the patterns sunlight made on his skin. Why do you like the sun so much? His sister once asked. Because it reminds me I'm here, he said. But one winter, she stopped asking questions. Her light, once louder than his, faded too quickly. The silence that followed was not just quiet, was cold. Their mother pulled the curtains tighter, and he stopped sneaking out for a long time, until one day, years later, he found a shoebox filled with drawings his sister had made. They were all of light, sunbeams, windows, lamps, even candles floating in the sky. On the last page, in shaky handwriting, she had written, Don't forget how to glow. He didn't cry, not then. He just stood up, walked outside, and faced the gray sky. It didn't offer warmth, but it offered space, and something in him moved. He began collecting little things, a smooth stone, a glass marble, a ribbon the color of dandelions. He didn't know why, he just knew they felt like parts of the sun. Eventually, the box became a drawer, the drawer became a trunk, and the trunk became a cart. It wasn't planned. It was simply the only thing that made sense. He painted it yellow with leftover paint from a forgotten festival, built small shelves inside, added a drawer for notes, and hooks for jars. When people asked him what made him start, he always said, "I lost something, so I share what I can still feel." No one ever knew about the shoebox or the last note, but every time he sealed a letter with gold wax, he whispered the same thing to himself. "This one is for her." Some days were harder. When the rain came sideways and the wind tried to blow the cart off balance, but he came anyway. Not for the sales, not for the smiles, but because the act itself became a promise, one he had made to himself, and to a girl who once drew light when the world felt dark. That promise had no expiration, only rhythm. So he showed up and offered light reel or imagined them the days no one else did. The cart wasn't supposed to travel. It was built for the narrow paths of the village, for the bakery corner, for the rhythm of one man's quiet offering. But one morning, just before dawn, a letter arrived. No name, just a seal in the shape of a sun. Inside, a message: "We heard of your light. Bring it to where the rain doesn't stop." No address, only a hand-drawn map and a pouch of coins wrapped in yellow ribbon. He hesitated, not because he was afraid, but because his rhythm had never been interrupted before. Still, something in him stirred. He cleaned the cart, replaced the cracked wheel, filled a drawer with extra notes, and packed twice as many jars. As he left the village, children lined the street with paper suns in their hands. Some adults watched quietly, unsure of what they were feeling. The baker handed him a small loaf shaped like a lantern. "In case the light inside dims," she said. The road was unfamiliar, the skies even grayer than before. The town on the map was smaller than his own, but heavier. The people walked quickly, heads down, as if carrying invisible burdens too heavy to share. He set up his cart near the square. No one stopped, not for hours. Some glanced, some frowned. A few muttered that he must be lost, but he waited, just as he had learned to do. By evening, a small girl approached, hair tangled, eyes tired. She didn't speak, just stared, then pointed to the sign. "Sunlight." He nodded. "Can I buy some for my brother?" "Of course," he said. "How much do you have?" She reached into her pocket and pulled out a button. "Worn, faded, precious. That'll do." He smiled and handed her a jar with a flicker inside. "Tell him this is what mornings feel like." She ran off, clutching it like it was made of gold. The next day, more came. One man asked for a letter. A woman requested warmth for her sick mother. James's journey from rock bottom to his first million. James woke up on the cold floor of his pickup truck, parked outside a Walmart in Phoenix, Arizona. At 28 years old, he had lost his house, his construction job, and nearly all his dignity. The divorce had cost him not just half of his few possessions, but also custody of his 7-year-old daughter, Emily. "I'm a complete failure," he murmured, looking into the rearview mirror. "Men like me don't bounce back." It was December 2019, and James had been living in his truck for 3 weeks. His only belongings fit in the back seat: a few clothes, a broken laptop, and $47 in cash. "This is my reality," he thought as he washed up in a public restroom. "I have no luck, no connections, no shot." The temp work in warehouses barely paid enough for gas and food. James felt ashamed, especially when he saw Emily every other weekend. "Daddy, when are you getting a house again?" she'd ask, with that innocent voice that broke his heart. "Soon, princess," he lied, not believing his own words. But something shifted on Christmas Eve. James was at the public library using the free Wi-Fi to search for jobs when he overheard two businessmen talking. They were discussing the expansion of a food truck franchise and how the market was booming, especially in urban areas. "Wish I had thought of that," one said. "Food trucks are making bank right now." James had never considered entrepreneurship. He had always worked for others, believing business is for rich people and I don't have what it takes to be a boss. But something in that conversation planted a different seed. What if I could do that? He asked himself for the first time. That night, in the back seat of his truck, James started researching food trucks on YouTube. He discovered that many owners had started with less than $10,000 and were earning six figures a year. "I can learn anything I choose to learn," he said to himself. Feeling a spark he hadn't felt in months, James completely changed his routine. Instead of spending his free time feeling sorry for himself, he began obsessively studying the food truck business. "I invest in my education," every day became his new affirmation. He learned about permits, suppliers, locations, marketing, and most importantly, entrepreneurial mindset. "I am a business owner in training." James began telling himself every morning, even while still living in his truck. He visualized his food truck, customers lining up, counting the cash at the end of the day. "My mind creates my reality," he repeated as he sketched layouts of his future business. The first step was to get a better job. James applied his new research skills and landed a position with a catering company that paid $18 an hour. "I deserve to be well paid for my work," he affirmed as he absorbed the inner workings of the food industry. With a higher income, James rented a small room and began saving aggressively. "Every dollar I save is an investment in my future," he said as he deposited $500 a month into his savings account. He cut all unnecessary expenses and lived with absolute minimalism. During his breaks at work, James visited food trucks across the city, talking to owners, asking questions, learning their challenges and wins. "I network constantly," he reminded himself. "I build relationships that help me grow." One of the owners, Miguel, was impressed by James' dedication and offered him a part-time job on weekends. "I accept every opportunity to learn," James replied immediately. Working on Miguel's food truck became his practical MBA in entrepreneurship. After 8 months of saving and learning, James had $12,000. He found a used but well-kept food truck for $15,000. "I find solutions to every obstacle," he affirmed as he negotiated a payment plan with the seller. James specialized in authentic Tex-Mex food, using recipes from Miguel's family and adding his own twist. "I create unique products that people love," he repeated as he perfected his dishes. He named the business Desert Thunder Tacos. The first day of operations was a disaster. Only 3 customers with $27 in total revenue. Failures are lessons in disguise, James reminded himself. "I learn from every experience and improve constantly." He analyzed every aspect of that day: location, timing, pricing, presentation. He made adjustments based on data, not emotions. "I am a natural problem solver," he said as he refined his strategy. The turning point came when James discovered the power of social media. He began documenting his journey on Instagram, sharing his story of transformation. My authenticity attracts ideal customers. He realized as his following grew. James' content resonated with people who were also struggling. They identified with his journey and wanted to support his business. I inspire others through. My success became a powerful realization within 3 months. Desert Thunder Tacos had lines of 30 people every lunch hour. James was making $800 a day and reinvesting everything into the business. I reinvest my profits to accelerate growth, he repeated while upgrading his equipment. The success of the first truck allowed James to expand. He bought a second truck and hired 2 employees. I am a leader who develops talent, he affirmed while training his team. Within a year, he operated 3 food trucks across Phoenix. James not only regained financial stability, but also shared custody of Emily. "Daddy, you're amazing," she said as she saw the long line at his truck. I am a positive role model for my daughter, James thought. Feeling genuine pride, the business grew to $50,000 in monthly revenue. James opened a central kitchen to prep food for all 3 trucks, creating economies of scale. I think big and execute smart became his operational philosophy. 2 years after sleeping in his truck, James was speaking at a small business conference in Las Vegas. I had no money, no connections, no experience, he told the audience. But I had something more powerful, the decision to change my mindset. I transformed my life by changing my thoughts, James explained. I stopped seeing myself as a victim and started seeing myself as the creator of my reality. Every morning, I program my mind for success. After the talk, an unemployed young man approached him. "Do you really think someone like me could build a business?" James smiled, remembering his own doubts. "I don't just think it's possible. I guarantee it, if you're willing to change your mind first." James expanded into franchising, licensing his concept to other aspiring entrepreneurs. I multiply my success by helping others prosper became his new mission. Desert Thunder Tacos now operates in 6 states with 24 locations. Today, James has a net worth of $1.8 million and a company generating over $4 million in annual revenue. He bought a beautiful house in Scottsdale and has Emily every weekend. I've created abundance in every area of my life, he reflects during his morning walks. But James never forgets where he started. He founded an organization that helps homeless individuals start small businesses. The more I give, the more I receive, he discovered as a universal truth. I am living proof that it doesn't matter where you start, James says in his talks. What matters is where you decide to go and who you choose to become. His story inspires thousands who are facing similar adversity. Every night before sleeping, James programs his mind for the next day. I wake up tomorrow with new opportunities to create wealth. My mind is a magnet for million-dollar ideas. I am abundant in every area of my life. James' journey proves that financial transformation is possible for anyone willing to change their mindset and take consistent action. I am the author of my success story, he whispers as he falls asleep, knowing even his dreams are building his prosperous future. I am a powerful creator of wealth. My mind is programmed for abundance. Each day brings new opportunities to thrive. I deserve unlimited success. The gardener who planted dreams no one believed in a quiet valley, far from the noise of cities and the rush of expectations. There lived a man who had never planted anything anyone believed in. His name was never recorded in books, and his home, a crooked wooden cottage surrounded by dry earth and wild silence, had never been visited by travelers or praised by poets. But he had one thing most people had forgotten how to carry: an unshakable belief in unseen things. Every morning before the sun painted the sky, he walked barefoot through his small patch of land, whispering to the soil, touching the dust with fingers that had no proof, only faith. He didn't plant food or flowers. Instead, he buried things, like ideas, hopes, and what he called dream seeds, invisible to the eye, but very real to his heart. The villagers called him odd. Some said he was lost. Others said he was cursed to loneliness. Yet he kept planting, season after season, in silence, without asking for approval or applause. His neighbors came and went, harvesting corn, selling cattle, building fences, but the man stayed. He watched the wind, the way the shadows moved, and listened to the silence as if it were an ancient friend. One morning, a child wandered onto his land, curious. "What are you growing?" she asked, looking around at what seemed like barren ground. He smiled, knelt down, and pointed. "Dreams," he said softly. "They take longer than tomatoes." The child giggled and ran off, but she came back the next day, and the next. Slowly, others followed. A widow who had forgotten how to sing, a boy with broken shoes who wanted to build things, a girl who spoke only in drawings. They came and sat on the edge of the garden, not expecting much. Yet, when they left, something had shifted in them. They didn't understand it at first, just a feeling, like a light warming. The corner of a cold room. The gardener never explained. He simply offered water and silence, and still nothing visible grew. No stalks, no blossoms, only bare earth and footprints of those who came with questions and left with softer hearts. One winter, a great storm came through the valley. Trees fell, roofs shattered, and many gardens were lost. But his land remained untouched, as if protected by the very dreams he had buried. That spring, something unusual happened. A faint shimmer spread across his field at dawn, like dew made of light. Where the villagers saw only emptiness before, they now saw patterns in the soil, like invisible seeds finally drawing outlines. Not plants, not crops, but something deeper. Paths began to form gentle trails that led people back to their forgotten passions. A woman who once wrote poems as a child began to write again. A man who had closed his bakery reopened it and baked bread that made people cry. A boy who had stopped speaking began humming tunes that healed, and no one knew why, except the gardener. He simply kept walking his land, watering the invisible, tending to the impossible. Some said he had magic. Others believed he had found a way to speak with the soul of the earth. But he never claimed anything. He only said, dreams just need someone who stays long enough for them to feel safe to grow. And slowly, people started planting differently, not just for food, but for healing, for hope, for things that couldn't be measured in coin or fame. His garden, still quiet and simple, became a place of return, not of escape, but of remembering. And every seed buried in silence echoed something much louder in the heart of those who passed through. seasons passed, and the gardener grew older. His hair turned the color of snow, and his hands moved slower, but his eyes held the same quiet fire they always had. Visitors still came, some seeking answers, others simply needing a place where silence didn't feel like loneliness. They walked. Among the invisible paths breathed the stillness, and left with something they hadn't arrived, with a sense that their lives, even if unnoticed, carried meaning. One evening, as the sky bled into gold and violet, a young man approached the gardener. He was restless, carrying a notebook filled with unfinished plans. "I've tried everything," he confessed. "Worked hard, studied, applied every formula, but nothing grows." The gardener offered him tea and listened. When the young man finished speaking, the old man nodded. "Did you ever just believe?" he asked. The young man hesitated. "Believe? In what?" "In the possibility," the gardener said, "that something can come from what looks like nothing." The young man laughed, but not mockingly, more like someone remembering a forgotten song. He stayed the night, and in the morning, he helped the gardener walk the land. "What are we doing?" he asked. "Showing the earth we're still here," the gardener replied. Later that day, the young man wrote in his notebook, not a plan, but a feeling. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel behind. He felt exactly where he needed to be. Elsewhere, stories of the garden began to spread, not as legends, but as whispers. People spoke of how they left lighter, as if something unseen had been lifted from their shoulders. No signs were placed, no brochures, yet the garden became a place where the wounded and weary came to rest. A woman who had lost everything sat by the old well for hours and left with the courage to begin again. A father who hadn't hugged his son in years returned home and simply said, "I missed you." A teacher, burnt out and bitter, came for a moment of silence and returned to her class with new eyes. And still, the gardener asked for nothing. He only gave water to the invisible and time to the forgotten. One day, the child who once asked him about tomatoes returned, now a woman with her own small piece of land. She brought her daughter and said, "I wanted her to see where dreams grow." The gardener smiled. His voice, softer now, whispered, "They grow wherever someone dares to believe before they see." The woman cried, not because she was sad, but because something finally made sense. As years passed, others began gardens of their own. Not replicas, but places inspired by what they felt. Some wrote, some built, some simply listened. But each, in their own way, planted what others had abandoned: dreams, trust, softness. And in the center of it all, the original garden stood. No signs of wealth, no trophies. Just soft earth, silent paths, and stories imprinted in the wind. Gardener's time came. There was no ceremony. Just a morning mist, bird songs, and a breeze that carried his name like a blessing. His cottage remained, cared for by those who had once come broken and left whole. No one tried to fill his shoes. They simply walked the paths he had made, watered the silence, and listened for the next invisible seed. The world outside kept rushing, measuring, demanding. But here, in this valley of impossible dreams, time bent gently toward meaning. And still, if you visit the place at dawn, when the light is quiet and the earth still breathes in sleep, you might feel something stir beneath your feet. Not a plant, not a root, but a dream, long planted, waiting for someone like you to believe just enough for it to grow. The teller of rivers in an old village, where fields stretched to the horizon and the sound of a stream echoed like a forgotten song, lived a man named Elias. He wasn't wealthy or famous or even much of a talker. Elias was a teller of rivers, not the kind who drew maps or explored distant lands. He walked along the banks of the village's streams, watching the water, counting its curves, its stones, its hidden stories. His house was small, with a tiled roof and a door that creaked in the wind. Elias went out every morning with a notebook of yellowed pages and a worn pencil, and wrote down what he saw. The way the water danced over a rock, the glint of a stone wet by the sun, the murmur of the stream as it met a bend. He didn't count to measure or control, but to understand, as if each river held a secret only he could hear. The villagers thought it was strange. Why count rivers, they said. The water passes and doesn't return. But Elias just smiled and kept on. He believed that a river, no matter how simple, carried a memory, a lesson, a piece of peace. One morning, a woman named Mariana came to Elias's house. She looked exhausted, her eyes full of an unspoken sadness. "My life feels like a knot," she said. "I can't find a clear path. Can you help me?" Elias looked at her and took his notebook. He led her to a nearby stream, where the water flowed slowly, and pointed to a gentle curve. "See how the river moves around this stone," he said. "It doesn't fight, it just flows. I'll tell this river for you." He sat on the bank and described every detail, the way the water embraced the stones, the reflection of the sky on the surface, the soft sound that seemed to sing. When he finished, he gave Mariana a page from his notebook with his words. "Read this when you feel lost," he said. "The river will show you the way." Mariana returned days later. Her voice was lighter, as if she'd found a bit of clarity. "Those words," she said, "made me hear the river even from so far away. I don't know how, but I feel I can move forward." She brought a basket of peaches as thanks. Elias accepted and placed the basket on a shelf already crowded with small gifts. A loaf of herb bread, a smooth streamstone, a hand-woven cloth. Slowly, the village began to change. People came to Elias, one by one. A carpenter who couldn't stop thinking about work. An old woman who missed her husband who had passed. A young man who dreamed of journeys but was afraid to start. For each, Elias told a river. He listened to their stories, walked to a stream, and described what he saw. The curve of a river that seemed to dance, the glint of a stone under moonlight, the sound of the water that seemed to whisper hope. For a mother worried about her children, Elias told of a wide river with banks that seemed to embrace the earth. For a merchant weighed down by debts, he described a swift stream that flowed without looking back. Years passed, and Elias's house was never empty. He didn't ask for much, sometimes nothing at all. But the gifts kept coming. A jar of honey, a pair of gloves for winter, a basket of fresh walnuts. His house, once simple and cold, now had a fireplace warming the nights, a table full of fruit and bread, a window glowing with morning sunlight. Elias never sought riches. he never wanted fame, but in his own way, he was wealthy. Because every river he told, every story he described, brought a bit of peace to someone. And in the quiet of the village, as people read his notes, Elias knew that small things, done with care, build something greater than the world can measure. He kept telling rivers, even when his hair turned white and his hands began to tremble. People came from far away now, from other villages, from distant cities, bringing stories of sleepless nights, heavy hearts, dreams that seemed lost. Elias listened to each one with the same patience and told a river for every story. A man who had lost his sister brought an old coin, asking for something to remind him of her. Elias took him to a calm stream and described how the water formed, gentle swirls, as if dancing with memories, and gave him the notes. A traveler crossing the fields asked for something to calm her restless soul. Elias told of a deep river with banks full of wild herbs, and gave her a page with words that seemed to sing with the water. Each river story was unique, written with a piece of Elias's heart. Over time, Elias's notes came to be called river tales. No one knew exactly why. Maybe because the words flowed like water, carrying worries away. Maybe because those who read them dreamed of bigger things, of paths that seemed impossible. Or maybe because, when reading one of Elias's tales, people felt the current was closer. When Elias grew too old to walk to the streams, he sat in a wooden chair near his window and looked at the village. The fields glowed with a reflection of water, and he knew that in each house there was a page of his, guiding someone. His life, so simple, had touched so many others. The weaver of dreams in a serene village, where the wind carried the scent of wildflowers and the hills glowed under the silvery moonlight, lived a man named Anselm. He wasn't wealthy or famous or even much of a talker. Anselm was a weaver of dreams, not the kind who crafted grand stories or visions for kings. He worked with invisible threads, which he said he found in the air, and wove them into gentle thoughts that he offered to people. His home was humble, with mud walls and a window that framed the starry sky. Anselm sat every night in a wooden chair under the light of a lamp, and moved his hands as if he could weave the air itself, creating dreams that seemed to float in the minds of those who received them. He used no loom, no needle, just slow gestures, as if dancing with the silence. The villagers thought it was strange. "Why weave dreams?" they said. "They vanish at dawn." But Anselm just smiled and kept on. He believed that a dream, no matter how fleeting, could plant a seed, soothe a heart, change a day. On a full moon night, a woman named Teresa came to Anselm's house. She looked exhausted, her eyes heavy with an unrest she didn't explain. "My sleep is empty," she said. "I see nothing but darkness. Can you help me?" Anselm looked at her and made a slow gesture with his hands, as if pulling threads from the sky. He wove a dream of a lavender field, where the breeze blew gently and the sun warmed the skin. When he finished, he said to Teresa, "Close your eyes tonight and let this dream find you. It will take you somewhere peaceful." Teresa returned days later. Her voice was lighter, as if she'd found some rest. "That dream," she said, "made me smell lavender, even from so far away. I don't know how, but I felt my father with me, like in the old days." She brought a basket of freshly baked bread as thanks. Anselm accepted and placed the basket on a shelf already crowded with small gifts: a shiny apple, a smooth river stone, a hand-embroidered cloth. Slowly, the village began to change. People came to Anselm, one by one. A blacksmith who couldn't stop thinking about work. An old woman who missed her children who had left. A young man who dreamed of love but was afraid to open his heart. For each, Anselm wove a dream. He listened to their stories, moved his hands carefully, creating images that seemed to dance in the mind. For a merchant worried about the future, Anselm wove a dream of a golden horizon where the sun never set. For a girl afraid of the dark, he created a dream of shooting stars, shining in an endless sky. Years passed, and Anselm's house was never empty. He didn't ask for much, sometimes nothing at all. But the gifts kept coming: a jar of wild honey, a pair of boots for winter, a basket of fresh fruit. His home, once simple and cold, now had a fireplace warming the nights, a table full of breads and fruits, a window glowing with morning sunlight. Anselm never sought riches. He never wanted fame. But in his own way, he was wealthy, because every dream he wove, every image he created, brought a bit of peace to someone. And in the quiet of the village, as people slept under their imaginary stars, Anselm knew that small things, done with care, built something greater than the world can measure. He kept weaving, even when his hair turned white and his hands began to tremble. People came from far away now, from other villages, from distant cities, bringing stories of sleepless nights, heavy hearts, hopes that seemed lost. Anselm listened to each one with the same patience and wove a dream for every story. A woman who had lost her brother brought an old coin, asking for something to remind her of him. Anselm wove a dream of a calm river with banks full of flowers, and told her to see it when she closed her eyes. A traveler crossing the hills asked for something to soothe his restless soul. Anselm created a dream of a silent forest, where the trees seemed to whisper secrets. Each dream was unique, woven with a piece of Anselm's heart. Over time, Anselm's dreams came to be called floating dreams. No one knew exactly why. Maybe because they felt light, as if they danced in the mind before fading away. Maybe because those who dreamed them imagined bigger things, horizons that seemed impossible. Or maybe because, when dreaming one of Anselm's dreams, people felt the sky was closer. When Anselm grew too old to weave, he sat in a wooden chair near his window and looked at the village. The nights glowed with the echo of his dreams, and he knew that in each house there was someone sleeping under an imaginary sky, finding a bit of peace. His life, so simple, had touched so many others. Roteiroi, the weaver of stars Ingles in a forgotten village atop a hill, where the wind sang softly and mist curled around stone houses, lived Elias, a man with calloused hands and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 nights. He wasn't like the others who chased crops or shining coins. Elias spent his days gazing at the sky as if searching for a secret hidden in the clouds. At night, beneath a gnarled oak, he sat on a worn wooden chair, his eyes fixed on the stars, so bright, so distant, as if they whispered something only he tried to hear. Elias was a weaver, but not of wool or linen. He dreamed of weaving stars, stitching their light into something that could warm hearts, even on the coldest nights. How do you weave something so untouchable? He didn't know, but every night he tried, with a bone needle and an imaginary thread, sewing the sky in silence. The villagers laughed, called him a foolish dreamer. "Come back to Earth, Elias," they said. "Stars aren't for men like us." But he didn't listen, continuing night after night with the wind as his only friend. One night, when the moon was just a silver thread, something changed. A star fell, not like the shooting. Stars that streak and vanish, but a real star, radiant, warm, landing on the hill like a glowing stone. Elias ran to it, his heart pounding like drums. It was small, the size of an apple, but pulsed with living light. He held it gently, feeling its warmth. And then it spoke. "Elias, why do you persist in weaving the sky?" He hesitated, then answered, "Because I believe stars can heal, can bring light to those who see only darkness." The star glowed brighter, as if smiling. "Then I'll teach you," it said. "But weaving stars is weaving hope, and hope requires patience." From that night on, the star guided Elias. It taught him to use threads of moonlight, fine as spider silk, and needles made of forgotten dreams. He learned to stitch constellations, not just to adorn the sky, but to create cloaks of light that warmed souls. Each stitch was slow, deliberate, as if time itself paused to listen. He wove memories of old laughter, quiet nights, promises made under the sky, and slowly, the village began to change. People, once weary and hollow-eyed, felt something new. A woman who'd lost her child said she felt him smiling when she looked at the sky. An old sailor, worn by storms, found peace in Elisa's constellations. The weaver didn't stop. Night after night, he climbed the hill, sat beneath the oak, and continued his work. Sometimes the star returned, whispering new lessons. "Each thread you weave," it said, "is a piece of hope you give the world." Elias smiled, his hands now lighter, his heart fuller. He sought no wealth or fame, only the certainty that somewhere someone slept better because of his light. And so, the nights grew softer, the sky closer, and the village, once so silent, began to dream. As you listen, you might feel that same warmth, that same calm. Elias's stars still shine, up there, sown with patience and love. Close your eyes. Let the hill's breeze cradle you, and know that, as you sleep, the world within you is already changing. The seed that only grew in the dark, she found the seed by chance. It was small, almost invisible, wrapped in a crumpled piece of paper inside an old book at a used book fair. The note read only, "Seed of abundance, but be warned, it only grows." In the dark, the woman smiled, thinking it was just a joke. But there was something in the way the seed glowed, ever so slightly, as if holding ancient secrets. She took it home. She didn't have much, a simple apartment, overdue bills, and a heart tired of trying. Still, she decided to plant it. She prepared a pot with care, even without fully understanding why. And at the end of the day, she did as the note said. She placed the seed in the soil and hid the pot in the back of her closet in the darkest corner of her home. In the following days, she resisted the urge to check on it. She wanted to see, to control, to get results, as she always had in life. But something inside whispered, "This time, just wait." As the seed rested in the dark, she began to shift without noticing. She started to listen more to silence. to speak more kindly to herself, to give thanks for small things, even on cloudy days. She began repeating phrases that seemed simple, but vibrated differently. I allow myself to receive. It's okay to be quietly happy. Life hasn't forgotten me. It's preparing me. With each repetition, it was as if invisible. Roots were growing within her. The closet remained closed, but she no longer felt urgency. One day, after a particularly hard week, when everything seemed to fall apart again, she opened the closet door, not out of desperation, but intuition. And there it was, a small sprout, green, alive, delicate. It had grown in the dark, without applause, without witnesses, but with faith. She held the pot in both hands and cried, not from sadness, but from recognition. That seed was her. So many times left aside. So many times ignored on the inside, but still alive, still ready, and now blooming. From that day on, she planted a new seed every month, not to harvest quickly, but to remind herself that abundance often needs darkness to germinate, and that healing doesn't come with noise. It comes with patience, with care, in the quiet that whispers, you are worthy, even when you think you're not. The notebook that knew your name. They say that in a city hidden beneath the noise of all others, there was a tiny stationery shop. From the outside, nothing stood out. The paint on the sign was peeling, the display window was dusty, and the notebooks inside looked like they had slept through decades. But those who walked in felt something shift. The air was warm, like an old embrace. The scent was of wet paper steeped in tea, and behind the counter stood a woman named Maribel. She didn't sell, she observed. Each person who entered seemed drawn to a single shelf, as if the right notebook had already been waiting for them. There were thick notebooks, thin ones, some with fabric covers, others bound in leather or wood. But the strangest part was that every notebook had one page written. Only one. And on that page was the name of the person who picked it up. No one understood how, and when they asked, Maribel would only say, they already knew you were coming. A skeptical man opened one and found the line, do you still remember what you dreamed of when you were 7? A young woman in crisis read, it's not that you lost, it's that you haven't yet seen what you were gaining. An old man with shaking hands cried when he read, she knew you'd do your best. No one knew who wrote those words, but everyone left with something different in their eyes. A calm, a flicker, a remembrance that there was still time. One day, a tired woman walked in. Her eyes were hollow, her steps heavy. She was searching for answers. Maribel pointed to a blue notebook hidden among many. The woman picked it up. She read, and she collapsed into tears. The phrase said, you don't need to prove yourself. You only need to allow. She took the notebook, wrote in it for years. And every night, before sleeping, she read that line like a whisper into her subconscious. Her life changed, quietly, gently. It changed in silence, the way seeds change once they've already decided to grow. Eventually, she returned to the shop. But Maribel was no longer there. In place of the counter, there was only a mirror. And on the mirror, the same phrase from her notebook, written in lipstick, you only need to allow. The woman smiled. She placed her notebook back on the shelf and walked out lighter. From that day on, Others began to find their names there. Sometimes, what heals you isn't what you understand. It's what you allow. Sometimes, transformation doesn't come from what you say, but from what you finally let yourself hear, even without fully understanding. And there are notebooks that whisper the truth. You just have to listen. Slowly. The mirror that didn't show your face. They said that in a village, forgotten by time, there was an old house hidden between crooked trees and thick silence. No one knew exactly who lived there. But one thing was certain. Inside that house, there was a mirror that didn't reflect your face. Curious people came to see if it was a trick, if the glass was flawed, or if it was some kind of hidden magic. But all of them left in silence, strangely moved, because what the mirror showed was not what was outside. It was what lived within, as if the glass held memories. When you approached, you didn't see hair, eyes, or skin. You saw a feeling, a forgotten moment, an old wound that still hurt for no reason, a child you once were, a dream left behind, a scream that never came out, a light you dimmed yourself. Some cried, others just smiled, but everyone understood, without words, that what they saw was real. It was exactly what they needed to see. One day, a young man named Theo found the house. He wasn't looking for the mirror. He was looking for himself. Tired, lost, confused, he entered without knocking. The house felt alive. The wooden floor creaked as if it breathed. The air smelled like memory. When Theo stood before the mirror, he saw nothing, no reflection, no emotion, just a blank space, and that hurt the most. He stood there, still, 4 minutes that felt like hours, until the mirror began to fog up from the inside, as if it were crying. Then, slowly, words began to appear in the misted glass. You didn't disappear. You just went quiet for too long. Theo dropped to his knees. He breathed deeply for the first time in days. And there, he began to speak to himself. Things he had never said. Pain he had buried. Dreams he thought were lost. The mirror didn't respond, but it listened. And as he spoke, a soft light began to fill the glass, and finally, his reflection returned. But not the face he wore now, was the eyes of the boy he once was. The same glow, the same faith, the same unexplained courage. Theo left that house different, not because he understood everything, but because he stopped running. He realized the mirror wasn't there to judge or frighten. It was there to remind him of who he was before the voices outside silenced the voice within. And even now, they say, the house only appears when your soul is ready to truly see itself. Because the mirror that doesn't show faces shows forgotten destinies. The invisible vault where dreams are hidden, they say. We all carry an invisible vault inside our chest. But the secret isn't in what's inside it. It's in how we look at the key. There was a woman named Helena who lived in a quiet village tucked between silent mountains and fields that seemed frozen in time. She was known for her calm presence, but also for her lack of luck. Nothing ever worked out for Helena. The crops yielded little. The prayers she whispered to the sky vanished without echo. And the coins in her drawer never added up to more than 3. Still, she never complained. She rose with the sun, swept the porch, fed the chickens, and at night, she, sat in her old straw chair to speak with the stars. One day, a very old woman, the kind people aren't sure if they're real or a legend, appeared on the dirt road and handed her a single phrase. "You're not poor, Helena. You just locked the vault out of fear of losing what hasn't arrived yet." The woman disappeared like dust at dusk, and those words echoed inside Helena's chest for days. Locked the vault. What vault? She had no gold, no jewelry, not even a box of precious memories. But that night, she had a different dream. She saw a dark room, silent and still, where a golden vault hovered in the air, glowing with soft light. She approached, but couldn't touch it. It was as if something within her whispered, "Not yet." In the following days, she began to see life differently. She stopped chasing what was missing and started caring more deeply for what she already had. She planted flowers by the fence, cleaned her grandmother's old trunk, reread forgotten notes hidden inside dusty books. She began writing kind words on little pieces of paper and placing them in a glass jar. "I allow, I receive, I am worthy." Each phrase felt like unlocking something invisible. And slowly, Helena began to notice that good things started to return. A neighbor brought her fruit. A distant cousin sent her a letter with long overdue money. A customer from the city passed by and ordered dozens of her handmade straw baskets. It was as if the universe had only been waiting for Helena to stop hiding from her own abundance. But the biggest shift wasn't outside. It was in the way she looked at herself. One day, standing before the mirror, she whispered, "I don't need to earn it. I already am." That night, she dreamed of the room again. But this time, the vault opened, and inside, there were no coins, no gems, only a mirror. A clean, luminous mirror with one inscription on the frame: "You are the key." From that day on, Helena's life remained simple, but she no longer was. Because now, every small blessing was welcomed with joy, not fear. Every unexpected gift was received with peace, not guilt. Every dream was planted without doubt, like someone who already knows the soil will answer. And slowly, her life became fertile ground, where everything bloomed faster. People began to ask her what her secret was. And with a smile, she would say, "I didn't chase more. I stopped fighting who I already was." Because prosperity isn't about having, it's about allowing. And when you allow with love, even the invisible finds its way back to you. The forgotten notebook of a life yet to happen, they say, that every person is born with an invisible notebook under their arm. Inside, it doesn't hold the facts of life, but the blank spaces, the meetings that haven't happened yet, the dreams we never dared to wish for, the words that one day will still be said. Clara always felt like she was late. She woke up every day with a tightness in her chest, as if the world had already left and she had missed the train. She did everything by the book, studied, worked, took care of others. But in the silence of her pillow, she felt her life hadn't truly started yet. It was all rehearsal, a prologue stretched over years, until one day, while organizing her grandmother's bookshelf, she found an old empty notebook. The cover was simple, faded blue, but something inside pulsed. No writing, not a single line. But there was a note glued to the inside of the cover. "Write what you never had the courage to ask for." She froze. It felt written just for her. That night, Clara opened the notebook. Her hands were shaking. And for the first time, she didn't write what had already happened, but what she wanted to live. She wrote about the house she dreamed of, with wide windows and the smell of cake. She wrote about a love without rush, one that listened and laughed. She wrote about walking barefoot in an open field, unafraid of looking silly. She wrote, and something inside her shifted. With every page, it was as if she allowed herself to truly exist. In the following days, something curious happened. The pain in her back lessened. Dreams returned to her sleep. Ideas came more clearly, and new people showed up. A woman at the market said, "You have a light in your eyes." An old friend reappeared with a travel invitation, and her boss, for the first time, acknowledged her effort. It wasn't magic. It was permission. Clara realized she had spent years with the notebook closed, waiting for someone else to write it. But now she was guiding the pen, and the more she wrote, the more the world responded. One night, she dreamed of a room full of bookshelves. Every person she knew had their own notebook. Some were blank, others scribbled, some torn by urgency, others stained with guilt, but all were waiting to be written with courage. When she woke up, Clara understood. To prosper doesn't mean having more. It means allowing yourself to want. It means no longer surviving and starting to live with intention. Today, her notebook is almost full, but not with stories of the past. It's filled with possibility, because Clara finally understood life doesn't only happen through what happens to us. It blooms when we dare to write what doesn't exist yet, and trust that the invisible is reading too. The house that accepted gratitude as Pamin taught, the top of a quiet hill, stood an old house made of light wood, with wide windows and a porch that embraced the wind. There were no signs, no advertisements, but those who needed it found it. People of all kinds arrived, tired, discouraged, carrying questions the world had refused to answer. They climbed the path in silence, rang the bell gently, and waited. The door was always opened by an old man with a calm voice, linen clothes, and hands that seemed to have touched many pasts. His name was Abel, though few ever asked. He never inquired why someone had come. He only said, "Come in. Stay as long as you need. And when you leave, pay me with whatever you wish to leave behind." That was it. It's a simple room, a clean bed, a serene view. Warm coffee in the morning, soups that smelled like childhood at night, and silence. Not the kind that hurts. The kind that listens with you. The kind that holds memories and slowly breathes out answers. People stayed for a day, sometimes two, a few, for weeks. And when they felt lighter, they left. Upon leaving, they'd place something on the table, an old button, a dried flower, a handwritten note, and the man would simply smile. A young man once left a sketch with the word peace scribbled. An old woman deliberately forgot her mother's necklace. A child offered a chocolate coin and whispered it was his treasure. The house never needed money, but it seemed to grow more beautiful with time. Brighter in the mornings. Plants began to bloom on their own in corners. Those who returned said time behaved differently inside. One day, a journalist found the place. She wanted to write an article, take pictures, but the man refused, said, "This house isn't for those who want to see. It's for those who need to feel." She left, confused, and the house remained off the maps, until one day the man passed on. He left a folded note on the table. Prosperity doesn't live in things. It blooms where there's honest exchange. Keep leaving something kind, and it will keep living. Since then, no one has seen the man again, but the house remains. Those who enter feel warmth. Those who leave carry a new wish inside. And on the table, small offerings continue to appear, because true wealth might be just that, a silent flow between giving and receiving, between being and remembering that you already have everything you need. You just forgot where you kept it. The fisherman and the golden pea. Be believe there was once a fisherman who lived at the edge of the river, in a small woven hut with a roof of dry grass and walls the color of sand. Every morning, before the sun had stretched its arms across the sky, he would wake, roll his net over one shoulder, and whisper a quiet prayer to the river. He never asked for much, just enough fish to eat, enough to trade, enough to keep his old canoe floating a little longer. His days were simple, quiet, and ordinary. But one morning, as he dragged his net slowly through the shallows, something caught between the tangled ropes. It was not a fish, nor a piece of driftwood. It was a pebble, small, small, and glowing, faintly gold. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, but no matter how he turned it in his hands, the shimmer remained. Not bright, not blinding, just soft and warm, like the last light before dusk. He could have sold it. The village had merchants who loved shiny things, travelers who paid well for beauty. But instead, he placed the stone beside the doorway of his home, resting it in a bed of dry leaves and whispering, "You came from the deep. You belong to the earth. Stay with me." Days passed, then weeks. The pebble sat still. Yet something quiet began to shift. A woman passing by on her way to the market noticed the glow. She left a basket of grain by the doorway, saying, "This warmth deserves to be honored." Another day, a child wandered close, drawn by the shimmer, and returned later with a fish as a gift. For the stone, he said simply. The fisherman never asked for anything. Yet his hut, once plain and quiet, began to receive small offerings, seeds, fruits, smiles. No one knew exactly why. They just felt something when they stood near the pebble, like they were remembered, like they were seen. The fisherman continued his daily life, still casting his net, still whispering to the river. But inside, something was blooming. He began to plant the seeds he received. Small gardens took root near the hut. The once barren path became soft with green. Birds began to perch nearby, singing longer than usual. He spoke to them too, softly, not with words meant to be understood, but with a tone the world responds to, gentle, grateful, honest. And the stone continued to glow, not brighter, not louder, but steadier. One night, during a strong storm, many in the village lost their homes, roofs torn, belongings swept. But when they came to the fisherman's hut for shelter, they found warmth and dry space, and the pebble still glowing. He made tea from river herbs, shared every last bit of his grain, and no one left hungry. After the storm passed, the villagers gathered. They looked at the pebble, then at the fisherman, and someone said, "This stone brings fortune." But the fisherman only smiled. It brings reflection, he whispered. It reminds us what we already have. Still, the story spread. More people came. Some just to sit, others to leave small tokens, not to the man, but to the light. A soft, golden light that never asked for attention, yet gave so much. The fisherman never claimed it as his, never locked it away. He simply lived beside it, and in that quiet companionship, something beautiful grew not just in the soil, but in the hearts of those who passed by. The pebble had come from the river, but its glow was fed by gratitude. And in the fisherman's presence, people remembered that what we honor honors us in return. Too, as seasons changed, so did the rhythm of the village, where once the road near. The river was dry and cracked. Now it bloomed with footsteps and laughter. The fisherman's hut became more than a home. It was a quiet place of arrival. No signs, no invitation, and yet people came. They came when they were weary, when they were lost, when they needed to remember something they couldn't quite name. The golden pebble never spoke, yet it seemed to whisper through the leaves, through the tea, through the stories shared under the tree beside the hut. The fisherman never became rich by the world's standards. He had no coins, no titles, no walls of stone. But what he did have was abundance, the kind that grows slowly, shared in silence and sunlight. A merchant once offered to buy the stone. He arrived in a carriage lined with gold, promising a pouch of rubies and a life without labor. But the fisherman shook his head gently. "How do you buy what cannot be weighed?" he asked. The merchant didn't understand. Most didn't. They only saw the glow, the mystery. But the fisherman had come to understand something deeper, that the pebble was not the source. It was a mirror. It reflected what already lived inside those who paused beside it. And so, he continued to tend his garden, to mend his nets, to sit quietly by the river and watch the water speak in ripples. He told no grand tales, no philosophies. When people asked how the pebble worked, he'd simply say, "Try listening." Some scoffed, some stayed. But those who stayed often left lighter, as if something long buried had been acknowledged. One evening, a young boy arrived. His eyes were wide, his voice quiet. He carried nothing but a broken flute. He had heard the story of the pebble and had walked for days. The fisherman welcomed him with warm tea and silence. The boy sat near, the pebble holding his broken instrument. After a long pause, he whispered, "I don't know what to ask." The fisherman replied, "Then don't. Let it ask you." That night, under a moon softened by mist, the boy slept soundly for the first time in years. The next morning, he fixed his flute with thread and twigs, and when he played, the notes trembled, but they were honest. The pebble glowed softly, and the fisherman smiled. As time passed, the village grew, not in buildings or size, but in spirit. People began planting their own gardens, sharing more, asking less. The glow of the pebble never faded, but it no longer needed to be the center. It had done what it came to do. It had awakened something. One day, the fisherman grew tired, not from illness, but from fullness. He had lived, truly lived. He lay beside the pebble, now worn smooth by time and touch, and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me how to see." And as his breath slowed, a breeze lifted through the trees, scattering seeds from his garden across the riverbank. Gathered not to mourn, but to remember. They did not build a shrine, They did not frame the pebble in gold. They left it where it had always been, humble, low, glowing. And in its presence, they spoke softer, listened deeper, laughed with more heart. Over time, the fisherman's hut faded back into the earth, but the garden remained, and the pebble, it was still there, still glowing, still reminding anyone who paused that prosperity was never about what you held, but what you honored. The smallest gesture's a seed, a smile, a note on a flute could carry the weight of the sacred, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not to chase light, but to be still enough to notice when it visits, to receive it, and quietly to pass it on. Sinan, the guardian of the river tree, they say that every river has a memory, not just of water or stones, but of whispers and waiting. Along the banks of an old valley wrapped in fog, there once flowed a river known not for its size, but for its silence. And beneath that silence, hidden from the eyes of those who no longer believed in wonder, stood an ancient tree rooted deep into the riverbed. No one knew how old the tree was. It never bloomed. It never shed. It simply remained half in water, half in wind. Locals passed by it for years, barely glancing. It was just a tree, after all, until Maeve arrived. Maeve was not from the valley. She came from cities where rivers were lined with pavement and trees were measured in inches of soil between bricks. She was a biologist by training, but by heart. Something softer, something older. She came not with machines, but with a sketchbook and the habit of sitting still. The elders of the village told her the valley was dying, that the soil no longer held moisture, that the crops refused to speak to the ground, that the river had grown thin, like a tired breath. But Maeve noticed something they didn't. Birds still circled the old river tree. At dawn, deer would pause beneath its limbs and lower their heads not to drink, but as if listening. She felt it too, though she couldn't name it. It was like standing in a chapel built by time, so she made it her ritual. Each morning, she walked down with her notebook and sat beside the tree. She didn't touch it. She didn't measure it. She just watched. One day, after weeks of quiet observation, she saw a thread of golden moss spiraling up the bark. It wasn't there before. Or maybe it had been, hiding from impatient eyes. The next day, she returned with seeds not special ones, just native. Shrubs and wildflowers she'd collected along the way. She didn't dig deep. She pressed each one softly into the soil around the roots, like a child tucking in dreams. She watered them with river water and a whisper of hope. Days passed. Then, weeks. The tree began to change, not in a grand way, but in the subtle shift of breath. The air grew warmer near its trunk. Insects returned. The moss grew denser, golden threads curling like ancient scripts. And at night, Maeve began to dream. In her dreams, a woman stood waist-deep in the river, hair flowing like algae in current, eyes that held both thunder and lullaby. She said nothing, only looked at Maeve with a gaze that felt like being read. Maeve kept returning, kept planting, kept listening, and soon the tree, too, began to listen. One morning, Maeve woke to find the tree had bloomed it with flowers, but with droplets of sap glowing amber under the rising sun. The scent was honey and memory. The villagers noticed, first with raised eyebrows, then with questions, then with offerings. One brought a jar of soil from her childhood farm, another feathers from a bird that had returned after years. Maeve said little, but she noticed that with every offering, the tree pulsed, not visibly but inward, like a breath being held and then gently released. News traveled. People began to sit beside the tree, not for spectacle, not for proof, but because something within them longed to be near it, near her. For by now, Maeve knew, the tree was not just a tree, and the dreams were not just dreams. Sinan had awakened, not with thunder or floods, but with the quiet loyalty of someone finally being remembered. She was not a goddess to be worshipped. She was a presence to be partnered, a keeper of balance, a mirror of care. And in the mornings, when Maeve stood beside the blooming tree and saw reflections of strangers offering songs and stones and stories, she realized this was not science. This was sacred. And in healing the riverbank, something ancient had healed. In them all, the prosperity that followed wasn't loud. It came in fuller harvests, in cleaner air, in children sleeping deeper, in elders smiling without knowing why. The tree had not changed them, their attention had. And Sinan, the guardian who waited centuries in stillness, had returned, not with glory, but with grace. All because someone had remembered to kneel? Someone had remembered to care, till the days bled into one another, like the slow flow of the river itself. Aisling awoke each morning with the sound of birds hidden in the willows, her hands already tingling with the urge to touch soil, water, bark. She didn't ask herself why anymore. The rhythm of the work had become prayer. Her boots sank into the marshy riverbank, and she no longer flinched. She planted native reeds and quiet ferns, choosing them with care. The river had changed color since she began. No longer silted and gray, it shimmered with hints of its former clarity, a golden hue dancing when the sun hit just right. Villagers began to notice. First, it was the elders pausing on walks to stare longer at the water. Then, children came closer, building stone towers near the bank again. The whispers started. Soft and unsure was the old spirit returning. Was the river healing? They didn't say Sinan's name aloud. Not yet, but they spoke of a presence. Aisling never asked for help, but help came. A beekeeper left wildflower seeds on her doorstep. A retired teacher offered his shed to store. Her tools? She smiled at these quiet offerings, never demanding, always received with gratitude. Still, she hadn't seen the woman again. The woman from the water. The memory lingered, crisp and surreal. Had it been real? A dream shaped by exhaustion and loneliness. Then, one evening, as the sky flushed with apricot tones and the first stars blinked into existence, Aisling sat near the river, her feet bare, submerged in the cool current. She spoke aloud, not to summon, not to beg, but simply to share. Don't know if you were real, but this feels like enough to heal one place, even a little. The water rippled across the stream, where mist gathered low over the surface. A figure stood. She was not luminous, not ethereal this time. She was solid, her feet pressed to the stones. Her hands held a bowl of water drawn from the heart of the river. Her eyes, deep and storm-colored, met Aisling's. You didn't wait for miracles, she said, voice like soft rain. You became one Ashling's breath caught. The woman crossed the water, not walking on it, but gliding just beneath, as if the river itself carried her weight. She reached the shore and sat beside her. "You remembered something that was nearly lost," she continued. "Not me, not the stories, but the act, the tending, the belief that something small and repeated is what turns deserts into orchards." She extended the bowl. Aisling took it. The water was warm and shimmered, with faint golden threads. "What is this?" she asked. "Memory," Sinan replied. "Of the river, of every hand that ever cared, of every root and leaf that tried again." Aisling drank. It didn't taste like water. It tasted like belonging, like old songs, like the quiet joy of seeing something broken become whole. From that night on, others came. They didn't see Sinan, but they saw change. Flowers bloomed out of season. The sick healed faster. A woman, unable to conceive, bore twins. A man drowning in debt found a new trade by the water. They credited nature, coincidence, hard work, but Aisling knew. She didn't speak of spirits. She only taught others to tend the roots, to speak gently to the land, to give before taking. Prosperity came in waves, never loud, never showy. A steady abundance, like the flow of the river reborn. One day, years later, a child asked Aisling, now gray-haired and wise, if she believed in the old stories. Aisling looked at the river, now wide and alive, its banks a tapestry of green. She smiled. "I don't just believe," she said. "I lived one." And as the child ran off, a breeze stirred the leaves of the great river tree, and a faint laughter, carried by the current, danced into the sky. Sinan was still there, not as a ghost, not as myth, but as something woven into the soil, the water, and the hands of those who remembered to care. On Ansie's web of quiet wisdom, there was once a craftsman named Kojo, who lived in a small village nestled between gentle hills and the sweeping curves of a slow river. He worked with his hands, carving bowls, weaving baskets, and shaping wooden toys for children he rarely saw smile. His shop was modest, just a dusty shelf, an old wooden table, and the steady beat of his hammer. Each morning he opened his shutters before sunrise, not to greet customers, he had few, but to greet possibility. He believed in craftsmanship, in the quiet beauty of skill, but he did not yet believe in himself. One evening, as the air cooled and insects sang their last lullabies, Kojo sat at his loom, weaving a simple pattern. The colors were his own, dyed from roots and berries, earth-toned and honest. Then he felt it, a faint vibration in the air, like a chord tuned to stillness. He looked down, and frozen in the loom sat a small spider, slender and calm, its legs moving as if pressing invisible threads into the weave. It paused, looked at him, and turned back to its work. Kojo's breath caught. He could not move. The spider's thread was not silk but light, not colored but feeling. And in that instant, he understood that he was no longer alone. The spider wove. Each day, at the same hour, it appeared. He dared not shoo it away. Instead, he learned to leave a small bowl of honey and a drop of water beside the loom. They were gifts. It did not speak. But after weeks, Kojo began to notice patterns. A loop here that carried patience, a knot there that taught restraint, a line that curved with humor. He couldn't explain it, but his hands knew. One morning, a merchant came by. He noticed a basket in the window. It glowed with extra care. He offered Kojo a price he'd never dreamt. But Kojo hesitated. His heart whispered that something more important than money had entered his shop. He said no. The merchant left confused. That night, the spider wove a new shape, a spiral that hummed with resilience. Kojo watched until the pattern closed. Then he whispered to the web, "Help me share." The web shimmered in response. Over the next days, Kojo began teaching not with words, but with woven pieces. He invited a child to weave a single thread. The child laughed when it tangled, but the web shimmered, and the child learned to untangle gently. A young woman came. To learn patience, the web glowed when her hands slowed. The village elder showed up seeking humor. The web wove secret jokes in the pattern, and the elder smiled without knowing why. Quiet prosperity began to flow into the community. Not gold, not fame, but something deeper. A feeling of being seen, of learning together, of hands that did not tremble anymore at new skills. Kojo's shop became a place of small miracles. Travelers came, drawn not by advertising, but by stories a silent loom, a spider's gift, a craftsman who taught without words. Soon, Kojo realized that the spider was no ordinary creature. It was Anansi the spider who in ancient lore rescued wisdom for those who didn't need to hold it too tightly. Only Kojo didn't need to trade the web. He had found it at home, but the world needed it too. One morning, Anansi wove its final lesson into a web, a circle of threads connecting every knot Kojo had learned. It glowed so brightly, so quietly, that even the sun paused. Kojo stood and spoke softly. "Thank you." Anansi's thread unraveled into the air and drifted away. The spider left with it, and Kojo realized that he now carried the web within himself. He no longer needed Anansi weaving. Beside him, his hands remembered. The patterns remained, and the village remembered too. Kojo no longer expected the spider's return, but every morning he still left a drop of honey and a thread of silence near the loom. Not out of habit, but reverence. He understood now that the web had never belonged to the spider alone. It had always belonged to anyone willing to listen slowly, move carefully, and offer their hands without rush. With each sunrise, more villagers gathered not just to learn weaving, but to sit in the hush that surrounded the loom. It became a place where people spoke in fewer words and listened with more space between thoughts. There were no instructions, only demonstrations, and even those were quiet. Kojo began crafting what he called silent pieces, woven symbols that held stories within them. 1. Not for loss. 2. For growth. 3. For the kind of laughter that arrives after pain. A young mother came in one evening carrying grief like a hidden sack. Kojo handed her a woven square, light brown with threads of silver. She held it and wept not because of what was said, but because of what was understood without needing to be. Word of the loom spread beyond the village, not like fire, but like warmth. People from faraway towns came not looking for products, but for peace. Each visitor would bring something: a leaf, a feather, a strand of hair, a tiny stone. Kojo would gently place these into the fabric. Slowly, the loom became more than a tool. It became a witness. Every fiber carried pieces of dozens of lives. Yet, no piece shouted. all whispered, and that was enough. Children who once feared mistakes now embraced them. Kojo taught them to pause whenever the thread tangled. That knot, he'd say, with a smile that barely moved, is part of the pattern too. He taught a fisherman to see weaving in the way he cast his net. He taught a baker to understand patience in how dough rises. He taught a widow to recognize love in how her thread always curved toward others. The spider's presence faded into memory, but its wisdom deepened in the quiet. One day, the village square grew crowded, not because of any festival, but because people simply wanted to sit near the loom. Kojo didn't speak that day. He just wove a giant spiral, one thread, then another. People watched as the pattern expanded, then contracted into a perfect circle. And at the center of it all, he wove one single knot, made from a strand he had kept for years, the last thread Anansi had ever left. When it was done, the village elders stood and whispered, "This is not just a web, it is memory." The people nodded. The loom stood still, and then something strange happened. A soft breeze entered the room. The windows trembled. The threads glowed just faintly in. Those closest to the loom felt a shiver, not of cold, but recognition, as if something unseen had smiled. Kojo turned to the crowd and bowed not low, but deep enough to offer honor. Wisdom, he finally said aloud, after years of silence, was never meant to be hoarded, only held lightly so it can pass. He then gave the loom away. Piece by piece, he disassembled it and handed parts to different villagers, a leg to the young teacher, a beam to the baker, a spindle to the widow. "Build your own," he said, "and let it teach you." He walked away that evening with empty hands and a heart so full it almost glowed in his chest. As he left the village, someone whispered, "Where is he going?" But no one answered. They didn't need to. Kojo had taught them what Anansi had taught him. Sometimes the thread that changes everything is invisible. Sometimes the quietest patterns shape the loudest destinies. And sometimes prosperity begins not in the marketplace, but in the hush, between two breaths, when a hand meets another, and both agree to weave without hurry, without fear, and without needing applause. The legacy of Anansi lived on not in legends or loud stories, but in every silent thread passed between hands that believe wisdom can still be made, one knot at a time.